Good morning, nice to meet you again, Chris.
Good to see you, Enda.
Today, hopefully, we'll be able to discover a little bit about your role as an MP in Tamworth. To start with, can you tell us a little bit about how someone who aspires to be an MP would go through the process of becoming an MP?
Well, I guess fundamentally you've got to be elected by the local people in the constituency, but to get there you've got to be selected by a particular party, or none at all if you're an independent. Different parties have different means of selection, but in my party, in the Conservative Party, local members who join the local Conservative Party get to choose their local candidates. Anybody that's on what's called the approved list of parliamentary candidates can apply to individual local Conservative associations to ask them to consider them for selection, and the local association, all the local members interview who they want to talk to, pick the person that they think is best for them and for the community, and then that candidate is the candidate at the general election, and then it's down to the voters to decide.
Do you actually have to have, obviously, an interest in politics? Are there any qualifications involved?
You don't have to have a law degree or be a doctor or, have passed some kind of rocket science qualification. No, I think anybody that is interested in local concerns, anybody that's interested in the future of our country, the good of our people, is someone that's qualified to be a Member of Parliament. What you've got to have, I think, is a good ear for local concerns, and you've got to be a bit of an investigator. You need to know how to find a resolution to people's challenges, and sometimes it's a matter which is best dealt with by a local council because they're responsible. Sometimes it's a matter which local agencies, the police or the fire service can deal with, but sometimes also it's a matter for government which departments of government have to deal with, and then you can work with those too.
Would you say that it's a rewarding job?
It's very rewarding. It's sometimes quite frustrating, like all jobs, you can get out of bed one morning and think, crikey, it's going to be tough today. And you don't always get the result that you want to get. But if you work at it, and if when you take a knock, you get back up, dust yourself off and start again, then I think you'll find it's pretty rewarding. It's really good to help local people and try to make a difference.
And make a difference for the country as well.
For the country too, yes, that's important.
Is there a minimum age at all, or an age limit to become an MP?
There's no age limit. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Vince Cable, is in his mid-70s, and Ken Clarke, very well-known Conservative MP, is, he's the other side of 75, let me put it like that.
Very tactfully put.
As best I can. There's a minimum age, yes, you have to be 18, you have to be of the age to vote, but beyond that there's no minimum, and you've got some very young members of Parliament. Mari Black, who's a Scottish National Party member, is in her very early 20s. We've got a couple of young guys in their 20s as well, and so has the Labour Party. So there's certainly no minimum age below, well, there is a minimum age, it's 18, but you can be a young person and be a Member of Parliament.
Okay. What is your role as an MP in Tamworth?
Well, I normally spend about a day or 2 days a week in the constituency. The rest of the time I'm in London when Parliament is sitting. When Parliament's in recess, as it was until last week, I spend most of my time in the constituency. So my week is usually to spend Fridays and Saturdays in the constituency. Fridays here in my constituency office where you're talking to me now, and here I deal with local matters. So if somebody's got a concern about their tax arrangements, I can talk to the Treasury to try to fix those sorts of problems. If someone's got a really local concern about potholes or housing or schools, and I talk to the local councils and work with them to try and resolve those problems. So here in Tamworth, it's very much a question of dealing with local constituent issues.
And do you get out to see your constituents very often while you're in Tamworth?
I do. I do a lot of travelling around the constituency. I was at the Camberwell show earlier in the summer. I visit all the local villages in the constituency. We've got a village surgery in Harleston coming up in a couple of weeks. This Sunday I'll be in Eddingale, where they've got a fete, and in the town itself I'm out and about all the time. Recently I was up at Glasgow to see the people who run the Take a Bow theatre group, which is a theatre group for disabled people, and I was singing along probably quite badly with everybody there.
That matters, does it really?
It matters if you're listening. So yeah, I do get out of that, and that's the best way to find out what's going on in the town and what people are concerned about.
What's your role as a local politician working alongside the local government council?
Well, that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people don't really understand the difference between being a member of parliament and being a county councillor and being a borough councillor in Tamworth, because there is a difference. Each of those different roles have different responsibilities. So, for example, Tamworth Borough Council deals with litter collection. It deals with all planning applications, houses which are being built in Tamworth, or people who want extensions to properties. The County Council deals with local roads. It deals with potholes, a big issue for lots of people. It deals with some school issues, not all these days, but some. And the lion's share of your council tax that you pay every month goes to the county council, not the district council. A lot of people don't know that. A member of parliament is responsible for making sure that issues that central government deals with are dealt with on a local basis. So, for example, as I said, if somebody had got a particular issue with their tax arrangements, or with their pension, or with their benefits, that's something that I can deal with, because it's the responsibility of Customs and Revenue, or the Department of Work and Pensions. And I can also deal, of course, with national issues. I'm sure we'll come on to those when you visit me down in London. But there is a big difference between what MPs do and can do and what local councils are responsible for. And so what I spend a lot of my time doing is liaising with local authorities about things like planning applications, and asking them to help a constituent who's got the planning application, because technically I can't.
That, I think, will help quite a lot of people, because I'm sure we all do get a little confused at how the boundaries overlap and how sometimes they are completely distinct jobs. Thank you for that. You spend your time in Tamworth. What would you say is the most enjoyable thing about being the MP for Tamworth?
Oh, that's a tough question, because most of the time I'm enjoying my role. I like going out and visiting local groups. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago I went up to the Cancer Wellbeing Centre in Craven in Stonydelph. And it was a really rewarding experience to go and meet some of the people there who offer their time on a voluntary basis to people who live through the challenge of cancer. But also to meet some of those people who are living through the challenge, and the enthusiasm of everybody, the level of involvement that they all have in making that local service, that local charity work, is really quite something. So being a part of that, being able to share with them, to give them advice, maybe give them help, is one of the most rewarding parts, I think, of the job. And it's also one of the most educating parts of the job, because sometimes people say, oh, you know, you politicians, you've never had a proper job, you don't know what's going on in the real world. But the fact is, you know, I spend a lot of my time visiting local schools, going to local businesses and talking to the people who work in them, visiting local charities, talking to armed forces groups and armed forces veterans, getting out into the community. So you get to see a little bit of everything. So, in fact, you know probably quite a bit more about what's going on than perhaps some of the people that sit in the pub and say you don't.
Yes, I should imagine that's obviously, I think, quite
I go
true.
to the pub occasionally too.
And just have a little chat. I don't blame you. Do you actually spend any time with the local councillors?
Yes, I see them quite a lot. There are civic events that I will join them at. So, for example, this weekend we've got the Battle of Britain commemoration, so I also see a lot of them then, both Labour and Conservative and UKIP local councillors. And those in my own party, I suppose, I see a lot more. So I do see them. I'm often in communication with them, talking about local issues. My office, my team here, I've got 3 people who work with me here, Janet, Kate and Katie, and they deal with those councillors quite a lot.
You obviously and clearly enjoy your role as an MP. I'm just thinking about job security. How long are you an MP for?
Well, you're an MP for as long as the voters want you to be their MP, I think is the honest answer. We have a constitution which says that parliaments can only last up to 5 years.
That's right.
So there has to be an election every 5 years. Until quite recently, it was for the Prime Minister to decide when that general election was going to be. He or she would just go to the Queen and say, I want to dissolve Parliament, please do it. And we would have a general election. And we've now got a Fixed Term Parliament Act, which means that in order to have a snap general election, Parliament has to vote for its own dissolution. And that's what happened earlier this year when we had the general election in June. But essentially, when there's an election, you have no job at all because MPs stop being MPs for the purposes of the general election. You just have candidates, not MPs, and when the votes are counted, you can be either reappointed or you can be sacked. And if you're sacked, that's it.
So quite a short time to find another job.
Yeah, that's right. And there are MPs in all parties who lost their constituencies, lost their seats at the last general election, who are still looking for jobs. It's not always easy for some people.
And quite a lot of the constituents will be thinking about their time at work, 35 hours, 25, 40-hour week. Mm-hmm. What are your hours like?
Well, probably a little bit more than that.
I remember we spoke last time, I think it was 7:30 on a Sunday evening.
I normally go down to London on Sunday evenings. Parliament sits from 2:30 in the afternoon on Mondays until 10 o'clock at night. On Tuesdays, it's 11:30 until 7. Wednesdays the same, and then Thursdays 9:30 a.m. until 5 p.m. But clearly there's work that you do outside those sitting hours of the House of Commons. If you're a member of Parliament, you've got all of your constituency work to do. If you're a minister, you've got departmental responsibilities. And then there's Friday, like today, when you're in the constituency office here with me, and I deal with constituency matters. And normally we work Saturdays as well. Certainly I do, going to local events. I try and keep Sundays free, but if there's a big public event or there's a military event, then I will go to that. So difficult to say what hours we actually work. It's quite an elastic number of hours.
As and when needed.
As and when needed, and depending on, I suppose, how enthusiastic and keen you are. But it could easily exceed 50 or 60 or 70 hours a week, very easily.
Well, thank you for spending some of your time with us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for coming.
We've covered the role of an MP in the constituency. It's going to be quite interesting to see how that differs from the role of the MP in Westminster.
Well, there are some similarities and there are quite a few differences, because here in Westminster we are scrutinising government legislation. We're making the law, we're passing bills which become acts of Parliament and make the law by which we all live. But MPs are also, of all parties, doing business with ministers to try to represent their constituents on issues, great or small, which concern their constituents. So, for example, High Speed 2, which is a big issue in Tamworth and in surrounding villages. That's something which MPs here at Westminster have taken a great interest in over the past 7 years, and they've raised time and time again with ministers at a local level to raise issues about constituent concerns in Hints or in Wilnecote, for example, but also when it comes to voting, voting as to whether they think HS2 is right or not. I voted against the principle of HS2 at its second reading a couple of years ago. But we also deal with more localised matters. So if a constituent has got a problem with their pension or an immigration issue or a tax issue, MPs can take those sorts of issues up directly with ministers, and that often happens here at Westminster.
So something that's happened in Tamworth comes to London.
Yeah.
Fantastic. How is your typical day run?
Well, there's no such thing as a typical day at Westminster. They're all different, and that makes it very interesting. Sometimes a bit too interesting and a challenge. I mean, last night, for example, we finished this morning at about 1 in the morning. I left here at about 1:45 this morning to go back to my flat in Fulham. I normally get up about 6 o'clock. I come to Westminster nice and early. A group of us have this thing we call the Breakfast Club, and we get together at about 7:30, have breakfast in something called the tea room. And I'm normally in the office here by about 8 o'clock and talk to my team about the day's work. Usually deal with emails and urgent correspondence first thing in the morning. And then later in the morning, I will meet my colleagues in the Whip's office. I'm a government whip, so we'll be discussing what the business of Parliament, what the business of government is that day, and what the objectives of the government in getting its business through are that day. And then on a day like this, Tuesday, the House of Commons will meet at 11:30 for departmental questions. An hour later, there might be an urgent question which an MP has tabled about a very important local or national matter which the Speaker may have chosen to grant. There may be departmental statements. There's a statement today, for example, on Hurricane Irma and its effect on British overseas territories, which Alan Duncan, the Foreign Office Minister, will be making. And then we get into the substantive debate of the day, and today it's the finance bill. So it's about £16 billion worth of money which the government needs to do the various things it wants to do over the next year, and that has to be voted through today. And the finance bill can be debated until any hour. There's no guillotine on it, there's no stop. So MPs can talk way into the night, debate way into the morning. So there's no guarantee that we'll be going home early tonight. In fact, we might be going home sometime tomorrow morning.
So you've had a very, very long day.
A long day, and a longer day to come, I think.
Quite possibly. Okay. When you first became an MP, casting your mind back now, you made a maiden speech.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to make that maiden speech?
It's utterly terrifying. It really is. I remember saying to people afterwards, the House of Commons is a cross between a Roman amphitheatre and New Street Station, because you're there with all your colleagues in one army, drawn up against the other army, the enemy on the other side of the chamber, and there's lots of toing and froing, but there's also lots of chatter. People are chatting with each other. There's usually someone heckling, there's usually someone heckling the heckler, there are people coming in, going out. That's why it's like a railway station, people moving around all the time. And so you really have to be on your mettle to make a speech sometimes in that place. The speech that you make when no one's meant to heckle and when people are meant to be nice to you is your maiden speech, your first speech. And that doesn't alter the fact that the first time you speak in the House of Commons is very, very frightening, and it was no exception for me. Mine was made on June the 3rd, 2010, and I had to speak for 6 minutes and say nice things about Tamworth and the constituency, which is very easy. It's a great constituency. Nice things about my predecessor, Brian Jenkins, and that's easy to. Brian's a great guy. And you're not meant to say anything controversial. And as long as you stick to those 3 rules, no controversy, nice remarks about your predecessor, nice remarks about your constituency, everyone applauds you and everyone says well done and no one heckles or interrupts you. But nonetheless, speaking in the chamber of the House of Commons is quite an awesome experience, and there was no one pleased to hear the end of my speech more than me.
Thinking about taking a seat in the House, how do you actually know where to sit?
Well, you can sit more or less where you like. There are only a few rules. They're conventions, really. One is that if you're a backbencher, you don't sit on the front bench. That's where ministers sit, or where the opposition front bench shadow ministers sit. And if you're in government, you presumably sit on the government side, not the opposition side, and vice versa. But beyond that, you can sit more or less where you like. I think most MPs try to sit where they made their maiden speech. And that's a nice thing to do because it fills a special place for you, and you probably feel that little bit more confident about speaking. And the speaker also likes you to sit in the same place because it's much more easy for him to find you if he knows that you're going to make a speech, or if you're next on the order paper to ask a question. And if the Commons is very crowded, it's just a sea of faces. If he knows more or less where to look for you, it's easier for him to find you.
That's a good point. Never thought about that sort of thing. You are appointed to a role within government. Can you explain what your role actually is?
Well, I'm a government whip. There are 16 of us in the government whip's office. There's a Labour official opposition whip's office as well, which mirrors the government whip's office. There's an SNP whip's office, and the whips are responsible for making sure that the business of government is properly transacted and is got through the House of Commons effectively. And if you're in the opposition whip's office, then your job is to make sure that you try to trip up the government in its objective of getting its legislation through the House of Commons. I'm the government pairing whip, and that means I'm responsible for making sure that the government has all of its MPs present when there are votes. I'm responsible for making sure that we, the government, win all the votes. We've been pretty successful so far. So I suppose I'm the man that doesn't like to say no, but often I have to say no when MPs want to be away to maybe visit, sometimes visit the constituency, or they've got another engagement. They want to, if they're a minister, be away on a visit. I often have to say, well, I'm sorry, I'd like to be able to release you, but the government needs to get its business through. There'll be votes at this time, or later on today, I can't let you go. So it's my job sometimes to be tough.
So you have quite a senior role within the whip's office.
I suppose I do, really. It doesn't always feel very senior. It feels quite lonely sometimes, but yeah.
Can you explain a few of the terms that a few of us are getting used to? The 1-line, 2-line, 3-line whip, for example?
Yes, of course. It is a bit confusing, isn't it? Lots of jargon is used in politics, and it's a bit exclusive. It is a mystery to a lot of people. The whip's the old-fashioned term to whip. Isn't actually to beat somebody with a stick. It is, if you think about the old hunting terms, a whip was somebody who was responsible for making sure all the hounds went in the right direction, and so this is where the term whips came from. And so a 1-line whip basically means that you don't have to be at Westminster. There's nothing important to vote upon. Maybe there's nothing to vote upon at all. A 2-line whip means that if you're around, we'd really rather like you to vote. And a 3-line whip means that you have to be here and you must vote. The way we make that clear to MPs is that on the whip, which is circulated on email and it's written down and is on paper as well, under each vote there is 1 line, 2 lines or 3 lines, and that's where the 3-line, 2-line, 1-line whip term comes from.
And you talked a little bit about pairing. Can you just explain that fully for us?
Well, pairing is a means by which MPs can pair off one government MP versus one opposition MP. So they net out the effect on the parliamentary arithmetic, and that means that both MPs can go off and do things that are important to them, to their constituents. And so I will agree with the opposition whip's office that we'll pair X MP on my side against Y MP on their side, and neither of those MPs will vote on that particular day, and that means that the government's majority is preserved and the opposition accept that, whilst it means that the opposition get to keep the government majority tight, because our MPs are also not voting when their MPs, the opposition MPs, aren't voting. And so it works. It's a means of ensuring that the mechanics of day-to-day government can go on without gumming them up. But of course, on important matters, the budget or other major issues, oftentimes pairing won't take place. The expectation is that both sides will have all their MPs present.
And occasionally we've heard that the whip is withdrawn.
Well, that happens, I'm pleased to say, very, very rarely in most parties. If you withdraw the whip, it means that you withdraw your support for that person to be a member of your parliamentary party. So they're no longer a member of the Labour Party or the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party. They won't receive the whip, so they won't be told when votes are and what the government or opposition position is. They'll effectively be independent MPs, no longer members of a political party.
Quite a serious situation if that were to occur then.
That's why it doesn't happen very often.
Thank goodness. Whilst you're in the House, how do you actually represent Tamworth and your constituency?
Well, every MP at the end of the day is only worth their vote, and all MPs have a vote, and we all use our votes. So I represent my constituents, I believe, by implementing the manifesto that they elected me on. I stood as a Conservative Member of Parliament. The Conservative Party had a bit of a tricky general election, but we formed the government in June, and I was elected with, I think, 62% of the vote as the Conservative MP for Tamworth. So it's my responsibility, I think, to implement that Conservative manifesto. Having said that, there'll be lots of people, of course, that didn't vote for me, and that's absolutely everyone's right to vote the way they wish. I try to represent them by explaining what I'm doing, by helping them with individual concerns that they might have, and that's what all MPs do. There are opposition MPs, Labour MPs, SNP MPs, who of course were elected. They didn't form a government, they're not in power, but they were elected with more votes than anybody else in their constituency by their constituents to represent them on the issues that they stood on.
And sometimes you have a personal opinion. How do you reconcile that against what the government or your particular party are saying that you should be doing?
It can sometimes, for all MPs, be a challenge, but I take the view that I was elected on a Conservative manifesto, so the reasonable expectation is that I should support that manifesto. If I've got a personal problem with any particular policy, I will always make sure I go to talk to ministers about my concerns about that policy, lobby them, make speeches in Parliament, or ask questions of them formally by tabling written questions. And in doing those things, you can sometimes get policy tweaked and changed to the betterment of your constituents. So I think that's the job of MPs, to represent their principles, represent their political philosophy upon which they're elected, but also to make sure when there are issues which are of a local nature, that those members of Parliament try to represent their local concerns. And I think, generally speaking, you can do that better in government than you can in opposition, because at the end of the day, it's the government that wins votes in the House of Commons and usually in the House of Lords, and it's the government that makes policy.
Okay. I've got to the end of my question. Oh, I've got one more.
What's that?
Is the role of an MP different if you are in opposition?
Do you want to ask Chris about any of the other roles he's done, all the other things that MPs do other than being a whip?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Because you have done other things you can talk about,
Yeah.
and there are other things other than being a whip that other MPs do and other business.
One or two, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'll have a go.
Okay.
Okay. You've talked about your role at the moment as a whip. What other roles have you had whilst you've been an MP?
Well, I've been an MP for 7 years. I have been a member of the Energy and Climate Change Select Committee. Select committees are backbench committees composed of all members of Parliament from all political parties. And they look at individual policy areas. They scrutinise government departments and their legislation in those areas. And so I was elected by fellow Conservative MPs to be a Conservative member on the Energy Select Committee. I was the secretary of the 1922 committee, which again is another piece of jargon, I suppose, but that's the, if you like, the Conservative Backbenchers Trades Union, and I was elected its secretary again by Conservative Backbench MPs, and I've been a member of all sorts of all-party groups in my 7 years as an MP. So I've done various things, as well as being a plain old backbencher representing his constituents, asking questions, tabling questions, and generally trying to get to the bottom of things.
Is there a role of progression from backbencher, say, to Prime Minister?
There is, though probably not for me. There are a few stars who come into Parliament and go straight in and become ministers straight away because of their previous experience in business or in academia or whatever it might be, the military, for example. Most MPs are elected, they become backbenchers in either the government or the opposition party. They learn about Parliament, they learn how to make legislation, and they, like most people in any career, make their way. They progress up the ladder. The usual progress is to become a parliamentary private secretary, which means effectively you're the bag carrier for a particular minister, and you attend their ministerial meetings, help them to do their job, answer some of the questions that they may have, and be the oil between them and backbenchers who want to speak to them. And then you become a junior minister. There are about 100 ministers in government, and most of those are what we call junior ministers. They work in a particular department for a Secretary of State. And then, if you're really lucky, and if the Prime Minister thinks that you're doing a really good job and reckons that you've got real prospects of making a difference for the government and for the country, then you might be selected by the Prime Minister to be a member of their cabinet. And once you're a cabinet minister, then I guess there's always an opportunity to run one day for the party leadership. But I don't think that there's any vacancy in any political party for that at the moment.
So you're not looking towards, just at the moment?
I'm not
saying never.
I'm not looking. I've got no binoculars. So I'm not looking in that direction, no.
If you could choose a particular area that you would like to become a junior minister, for example, what area would you like to go into?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I really like the Whip's office because you get to see all sorts of aspects of government across all the departments. I've always been quite interested in energy policy. I was on the Energy Select Committee, as I said, so perhaps an energy minister role. But at the end of the day, that's for the Prime Minister to decide. And of course, if you're not in the governing party, you're not going to be a minister. So the first objective is to win your own election. The second objective is to win the election for the party which you represent and support, and then see where it goes from there.
Is there a difference being an MP in power to being in opposition?
I think there is. I think that you can get more done as a backbencher if you are in office, if you're part of the government, than if you are part of the opposition. And there are lots of reasons for that. One is obvious, that you're part of the governing party, you know the people who are making decisions, and you're able to influence them. But if you're in opposition, you've got a very important role to do. You've got to scrutinise what the government is proposing, criticise it if necessary, make suggestions, and try and persuade it either by winning votes in Parliament, or by encouragement, or just by generating better ideas. Try to encourage it to change its mind. But I think fundamentally, if you've got the authority to make changes which can help your constituents, that's much better than criticising another party and then telling them what you'd like to do, but not having the authority to do so. So being in government is better than being in opposition.
I'd like to thank you very much for your time, not only in the constituency in Tamworth, but also your time in London. Thank you very much.
Great to have you down here, and I hope you enjoy the view.
It's
not too bad, is it?
It's
not
a
too
very
bad.
Nice view.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Over there, yes, you've got Westminster Abbey and
Exactly.
The edge of Parliament Square.
This is Edna Hills reporting from the Palace of Westminster.